All right, welcome back to the Elias Makos Show. In Transit today takes a look at the cost of air travel in this country. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have family in Calgary. I would love to see my family in Calgary more often. I should see them every year. I don't. Number one reason, because of how expensive it is to get a flight from Montreal to Calgary. Well, the Fraser Institute has just released a report that could change the way Canadians think about air travel. The think tank is calling for major changes to reduce the high cost of flying with Canada. Let's find out about some of those recommendations, those changes being recommended. Jake Fuss is with us. He's co-author of the study, director of fiscal studies at the Fraser Institute. Jake, welcome to the program.
Very much for having me on the show.
Jake, why don't you do it for our listeners here? Why don't you fix air travel in this country? How do I end up with a flight that I can afford every year, Montreal to Calgary?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I mean, Canadian air travel can really be summed up in a few words. We have poor service, high ticket prices, and little consumer choice. But really at the heart of the issue is bad federal policy, as that's really where it's regulated and where the laws are made. And so there's a few reasons why ticket prices are so high. And one of them in particular is all the fees and taxes that are assessed when we're buying ticket prices for airfare. So about a large portion, about 25 to 35% of airfare costs in Canada are made up of fees and taxes. And then at the same time, we also have a lack of competition among airlines in Canada. Part of that is due to restrictions that the Canadian federal government places on on foreign airlines. So foreign airlines are generally not allowed to operate between Canadian cities as well. So there's a lack of competition and options available to people. And then we also have, a very flawed airport ownership structure that just adds even higher fees on top of this as well. So ultimately, we need to make some big changes to actually bring down the cost of ticket prices for Canadians.
Jake, I have to laugh sometimes when I think about air travel because, I look south of the border to the United States, right? And of course, the United States, they have a model, less regulation and obviously free enterprise. And I see all the examples of being able to fly across the country in the U.S. at a reasonable price. And then you go to Europe, right? Europe is like the kingdom of overregulating everything. Yet lo and behold, you go to Europe and you got the Ryanairs and the EasyJets, So I'm just wondering, what's so special about Canada? Because you go to a regulatory heaven like Europe or you go to free market economy United States, they both manage to get this better, get this right. What makes Canada so unique?
That's a great question, actually. One of the really interesting things about the European Union, and in fact, is actually they removed a lot of their regulations and restrictions for member states in terms of allowing foreign airlines into their operation. And when they actually deregulated some of their airline industry, they had more competition from new low-cost carriers like Ryanair. They saw a 34% decline in ticket prices, more cross-border routes, greater flight frequencies. And even the entry of new low-cost carriers alone helped lower airfares by 20% in Europe. So I think part of the reason why Canada is so unique is because we have so many restrictions, so many fees, so many taxes that other places like the European Union, Australia, New Zealand don't necessarily have. And they actually have a much more competitive space where they have more airlines, they have cheaper ticket prices than us. So we have this very restrictive and very over-regulated space in terms of the airline industry in Canada.
Talking about the cost of air travel in this country with Jake Fuss from the Fraser Institute. Okay, so I'm trying to imagine ways to lower the cost of air travel here. And one of the things is, okay, if you allow different types of ownership and more foreign ownership, isn't the worry that we just end up where all of our flights now, they won't be on Air Canada, they won't be on Porter or WestJet, but Delta will come in the next day, American Airlines will come in the next day, big foreign behemoths will come in and run the tables. And I wonder if that's a better spot for us to be in long term. What do you say to that?
That's a great question. I think, one of the things that Canada can do if it allowed foreign airlines into its airspace is also negotiate deals where you allow Canadian airlines access to their airspace as well. So if an American airline, for instance, is allowed into Canada, then the Canadian airlines would be allowed into the United States as well to compete. And I think this is beneficial for both Canadian consumers and Canadian airlines. And this was even confirmed 10 years ago in a federal government report where they concluded that restrictions on foreign airlines increased air travel costs in Canada and had outlived their usefulness. And what they even recommended was that Canada work towards an open common market for air services with other peer countries around the world. And I think that really important point is allowing that access for Canadian airlines elsewhere in exchange for allowing the foreign airlines to come to Canada. So this doesn't have to be a win-lose scenario. This can actually be a win-win scenario for everybody.
Let's talk about the airports themselves, because I think this is part of what you're getting at as well, and the structure we have in this country when it comes to airports. Last year, at the end of last year, during the U.S. election time, I was traveling throughout the U.S., and I got to go to so many U.S. airports. My goodness. They were beautiful. They were really, really well designed, new, all the latest technology from Tucson to New Orleans has an incredible airport. The Detroit airport, it was just incredible. What about the airport side of things? How do we fix maybe the fees, the charges, all of that the airports add to the cost of travel?
Yeah, Canada has a very unique airport ownership model. The federal government essentially owns the land where Canada's major airports are built, and then it leases it back to not-for-profit airport authorities that pay rent back to Ottawa. And this rent can be as much as 12% of their revenue per year. And so what these airports then do is assess fees on passengers to recoup that revenue that they lost to the federal government to pay for that rent. So you'll see things on your fees, for instance, called airport improvement fees. So that can be as much as $40 per ticket for a passenger, for instance. So this is a significant amount of money, and it makes it very difficult for budget airlines, for instance, to actually compete in terms of price and offering a lower price than other places. If you look at other countries in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, for instance, they operate a very different airport ownership model in which they allow for-profit organizations to own and operate airports, for instance. So they have many different models that they use, and it allows them to be a lot more cost-effective, and it also allows them to be innovative with their approach that Canada hasn't been. So places in Europe, for instance, are a lot more focused on in-airport shopping, for instance, as a revenue model, whereas in Canada, we're a lot more focused on everyone paying fees as passengers on their ticket prices. And this really adds to the cost, and that doesn't really allow for much innovation or much upgrades or other things to our infrastructure and airports in Canada.
Jake, is anyone listening to what you have to say? At the government, I mean, I'm listening. I just want to tell you that. But I mean, government, the people that matter, are they listening to what you have to say?
I think that's a good question. I think part of the ultimate purpose of this report is to get the discussion going for policymakers in Ottawa. Regardless of who wins the next election, I think a really important point is going to be how do we become more competitive in a lot of our different industries, whether that's in the air travel industry and telecommunications in Canada as well. Canadians generally are paying higher prices in many different industries right now than many peer countries around the world. So I think this is really just a starting point, pointing out what the ultimate problems are in the air travel industry in Canada, how we differ from other countries, and ultimately adopt international best practices. We can actually bring down ticket prices for Canadians and make it a lot more affordable for us to travel across the country.
Jake, thanks for joining us this morning. Really, really great pleasure talking to you.